This is the Witness Underground podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Kerry Kaye. She's an artist who has worked on a human rights. She's working for human rights. She has an experience with a near-death experience, and part of her story has to do with the Jackson family, Reevy Jackson. We're going to get into her artwork. We're going to get into, I'm going to show some here. Here's some of her artwork. And she wrote a memoir. She's working on a women's empowerment novel. We're going to talk about that. Get into the First Amendment rights that her family were involved in. She has a connection with the leadership of the Jehovah's Witnesses, which is something we're going to dive into, and Nathan Noor and Ray Franz, and esoteric Christianity, a study of the mystics, as well as the Essenes, Elaine Poggle's books, The Gnostic Gospels, The Origin of Satan, Adam and Eve and the Serpent, Brian Murarescu, The Immortality Key. We're going to get into some of extremist religious shunning that influenced her life in a really big way. So let me bring her up. I want to give you a little taste of her art there. I'm going to bring her up and we're going to get to know Kerry. How you doing, Kerry?
Hi there, Scott. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for coming on. I'm so excited to talk to you about all of this. You were just on the Barbara Anderson show on 6 screens of the Watchtower. How was that? How was that experience being interviewed by Barbara Anderson?
It felt wonderful because I had reached out to her several years ago, and it was as if we were just on the phone again and talking, and I really enjoyed it. She's a wonderful woman, and I'm was honored that she asked me to come on.
If you don't know who Barbara Anderson is, she was a whistleblower at Watchtower back in the late 90s. She was working on the Proclaimers book in the writing department for the Jehovah's Witness Watchtower. And then people were writing in response to an awake about child sex abuse. And she got thousands and thousands of letters about child sex abuse within the Jehovah's Witnesses. And then she whistle-blew that information and then got kicked out of their religion and had to fight. Now she's fighting for human rights, and she's like 25 years as a human rights activist. And so she's hugely well respected around the world and working on really important documentaries and featured in many documentaries. And now she has her own sideshow program on a kind of an obscure corner of the internet, the 6 screens of the Watchtower YouTube show. But she's doing a great job with that. So it's really cool that you were on her show. So let's get into your story. I mentioned that you have art, so I showed a little bit of your art. I'll just actually bring that back up here. This is your painting work. How long have you been doing painting?
I started painting as a child. I was in art lessons with a president of the Art Association, and she happened to be a Jehovah's Witness. And I used to go over there on afternoons, and my medium was acrylic. And it was just I found at that time, it was just a wonderful space to just dive into something and focus on something other than what was going on in the outside world. So that I was around 11 and 12 when I started.
Okay. Yeah, it's exceptional work. I particularly love this painting of the horses, which I put in the title screen image. And I love this one, the philosophy and style with this flower. I saw you have it in the background as well. Really beautiful painting, at least in the Barbara Anderson video.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you.
And you worked on a memoir. We're going to get into how that all went and some of the key moments of your story. But when did that memoir come out? And what's it called?
Okay. The memoir, like I told you, I wrote it and I submitted it for publication. Okay. And it has not been published yet.
Oh, okay.
So I decided just to because of family issues that were going on at the time, I thought, I'm just going to put it aside and work on my novel and then come back to the memoir after that.
Okay.
So
both are in the works.
They're in the works.
Gotcha. That's exciting. There's actually a lot of authors who are kind of tied to now or involved in a sense, the Witness Underground project. And so shout out to all the authors out there. One is in the chat right now, Anthony Mathenia. So hi, Anthony. And what do you think of the memoir aspect. People, when they get out of the religion, eventually there's this moment to find your voice and tell your story. What do you think of that avenue of writing memoirs?
I think that it's a great thing to do because it gets it out on paper, and then you can mourn and grieve.
Mm.
And then there's no, you can go to publication and share it. You can go traditional, or you can, there's the platforms are now that you can self-publish. But I think it's a great thing to do therapeutically, and when you're going through the healing process. I think people should write their story if they want to. It's not for everybody. Um, for me, it did its job, so to speak. In my personal situation, I healed from it. I put it out there. It got some footwork. It actually opened some doors for me. And I was even asked recently in another interview, Kerry, when are you going to publish your memoir? And I said, well, I don't know if people would really be interested in this just person who wrote this memoir, who is Kerry Kaye Davies. And she said, well, I think you should publish it. So, and this interview just happened last month. So I went, okay, I'm going to put it back on the drawing board. But I'm finishing up my first novel, and I'm going to pursue that first and then move on to it. But I think
Let's
it's
get
important.
into your book later on, but could you give the audience just an idea of what the topic is? I kind of briefly mentioned it, but just from your voice.
Okay, the topic is on human rights and women's empowerment.
Set in what time period?
And it's set in the year 1866, aboard a ship. And it's actually a true story of my third great grandmother, and I'm developing it. And it's going to be fun. I think everybody's going to enjoy it.
Yeah, like it's really exciting and interesting what you were telling me before on our pre-call. I really want to get the audience to follow that project and support you when it comes out. So,
yeah.
Okay, so I would like you to tell us when we're going to start the story, if that's okay, unless you want me to just decide. But
go ahead.
Okay. Well, I guess we can start at the beginning of how your family got involved, and I have a bullet point from what you talked about and everyone can go watch the Barbara Anderson interview, because it's a great interview that you get into a lot of detail about your past. But the emotional hook that the Jehovah's Witnesses they use that on your family, and you talk about how that worked.
Let's see. We had moved onto the street. We lived across the street from a couple who ran a board and care home. My mother we had lost my baby brother, so we were mourning my brother from crib death. And so when she met them across the street, they gave her a hope. And then she's, oh, that sounds wonderful to have, my son be resurrected. So, and my mom being in a depressed state at the time, it hooked her. And so the rest goes down in history. So.
Yeah, that one's so interesting to me, because I feel like without maybe even the active members not really realizing what they're doing, they might be oblivious to this, but it's sort of the standard operation, right? Like, oh, that person just went through something really tragic and traumatic. Now's the time to swoop in and get them. And that's basically what they did with your family, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Then the connection you mentioned to the leadership of the religion was actually right there in front of your family at that home. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. Brother Noor's mother-in-law was in the home. So I met her, and then I met her sister and her family, and we became very close with them. So then Brother Swingle came, and he would visit, and we actually did I guess Barbara said it was his stepdaughter that got married, and there was a wedding, and the reception was at my parents' home, and he had those bushy eyebrows, and I'll say it again, like I said it on her interview. He did have a nickname. There was the man who ran the home for the elderly, and a lot of the people came. Some of them had come from Bethel. He had nicknames for people, and Lyman Swingle he called Slimy Limey. They had been roommates back at Bethel, and I know that there's another. His nephew recently got in touch with me and said there's a lot of fun stories about their time at Bethel that were hilarious, and just being around him and the old people, we called them. It was a fun time. It was a fun time for me as a child. So um yeah, it was good times. regardless
There's, yeah.
Regardless of, oh, now I have to give up Christmas on birthdays. They kept us busy enough where it was like at that point in my life, it didn't bother me as much until later.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think Barbara is also very vocal about, yeah, there was a choice in life, and you're in this situation in this bizarre group, but at the same time there's lots of good moments to reminisce about. It wasn't like all terrible, but there are the things that are bad are actually very, very dark. And so we're going to get into some of those things. You mentioned in your story about a person with schizophrenia. I was wondering if you could touch on this particular story, because yeah, I liked how you wrote about it. So
Um, yes, there was one brother who was in the home, and I I was around him ever since I was, well, ever since we moved onto the street. He was like the key figure of the house. He he suffered from schizophrenia, but his delusions, I think, were very real to him. So many times, if he was in an episode, he thought Armageddon was actually happening, or
oh wow.
he was so emotionally fixated on the thought that he would start going door to door 5 o'clock in the morning and start crying
Waking
at
people
people's
up.
doors.
It's
Yeah.
the end of the world.
Yes. Yes.
Knocking on doors, yelling at people.
In fact, even I talked to a girlfriend of mine who lived on the same street too, and she called me because she wanted to reminisce about him as well, because he knocked on her door a lot, and she remembered him one time being in the middle of the street and it was raining, and he had his face up and he was yelling in the sky, because he
Wow.
thought Armageddon had started. So
Oh
that's
wow.
just like some of the things that happen. We would take we One particular time, I remember we took him to the ocean and we dunked him in the cold water to help him wake up from that episode.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. How did that go? I mean, I'm not advocating, I don't think we're advocating for any of these as solutions to schizophrenia, but
Mm,
like it's really interesting that, yeah, how did
just
that work?
the cold water would shock you and stun
Hmm.
you, and then it would bring you out of that world, so to speak. And that's what I observed, um, seeing this day in and day out. And it was always when he wasn't taking his medication, because the medication would stop the delusions. Um, so it was like, is he taking his meds? So we knew, and we were around him. I was around him for a good decade until they moved off the street. But I did go visit them for the memorial when they moved up north, and I get there and he's not there. And I'm like, where is he? We don't know. Um, I was still on the visit, and we get a phone call, and it's Bethel. They called the house
Oh
and they
wow.
say, we have him. We were like, you have who? We have him. He's here. He walked to Bethel from
What?
California. It
Wait,
took
what?
him 2 weeks. It took him about
Bethel's in
two.
New York, upstate New
Yeah.
York. No, no, and that time it was Brooklyn, but like 2 weeks to
Yeah.
walk to from California to Brooklyn. That's actually really impressive.
And he hitchhiked, and I think
Oh,
he had
okay.
enough money to maybe take a bus part of the way. But oh, to this day, he was friends with Ray Franz at Bethel. He was friends, he was there. He had to stop working there because he got ill. So this brother took him in. But I wonder that it was around the time when Ray Franz's book came out. And I don't know. He's not alive. I can't prove it, but I wonder if he found out and he was angry. He maybe wanted to know what was that, what is happening, because he was very determined. If he got something in his mind, he was, he was knocking on people's doors. He had to have answers. So that was something I did say on her interview.
Do you think schizophrenia, well, for a quick thing, shout out to Tony Duchesne, who's in the audience, and Fixing My Faith show host saying hello. And we've got Chronicles of Lucifer here. So I'm just going to say hi to everybody real quick. And Anthony Matheny is saying hey to Tony for his movie. So anyone who hasn't seen it yet, go watch Confessions of a Teenage Jesus Jerk. It's based on Tony's book. It's an awesome film. In my opinion, it's the best narrative film on the topic. It's really fun and dark and emotional ups and downs. It's great.
It's fantastic.
And Tony says, your stories, Kerry, are amazing. So.
Oh, thank you, Tony. Thank you.
You told me offline that you and Tony are in discussions with your book. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but Tony has a writing program for anyone who doesn't know that.
Yeah. Yes. It's good if you need to have some eyes on your work and you're not afraid of criticism. It's good because if you don't get criticism, you're not going to get better. So yes, I've been in his workshops over the past 4 or 5 years, going through and building my my craft, so to speak. So I'm really excited about what I'm working on. Really excited.
Very cool. Yeah, it's something I think Tony talks a lot about on his show, the Drinks with Tony show, which is awesome. I've listened to every episode until about 6 months ago when I got busy. But I really love his show where he interviews authors and never talks about any of their books. I think it's hilarious. That in that show, he talks about like getting edited before you publish. And I think there's this trap in the memoir space where a lot of ex-Jehovah's want to write a memoir, and that's great because it's a part of like showing your voice, expressing yourself and telling your story. But getting edited, having an editor or like honing your story down to something that's where you can get it published is so important to making your story more compelling and interesting. It's probably the right move.
Because we have our audience, but if we could broaden the audience so that it gets read for more people, or have the stories more like have the morals of the stories kind of disguised in a way too. That's why I'm kind of working on my next project, because the same, it's this, we're all humans, we're all people, we all have the same ups and downs in life, and our stories are very similar, but in different time periods or in different arenas of people, different worlds. So if we can broaden it, we get a Jehovah's Witness may pick up your book and they may read it not knowing that it's going to give them a life lesson that they need. So
yeah. So if you're going to go through the process, might as well polish it and make it great. It's in anything like this, even like making Witness Underground, the documentary, it's exhausting. I was exhausted after shooting. We didn't even start editing. So there's all these moments where you're like, I think I'm done. I think I need to just stop because it's exhausting. But if you come back to it, pick it back up, and you're gonna have fresh eyes, make it better, make it something that's like gonna worth sharing for other people to make it worth sharing, because it's so good. So all that to say, awesome that you're here, Tony. Thanks for checking in, and that you're helping other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses and other human beings, all from whatever background, tell their stories. And he has a monthly writing creative workshop that's free with the UCLA extension through the Los Feliz library. Big fan. Check out his work. But let's get back to your story, Kerry. This is interesting. This idea of this person with schizophrenia makes me think about if the leaderships in Bethel are like, this is our guy. Like, was there a lot of schizophrenia, do you think, in the early or the period that you were a part of the religion, or do you think it has anything to do with the original leadership?
You know, I've done some research on it because I was really interested in it myself. There is a higher rate of mental illness within the Jehovah's Witnesses, whether they attract people to the organization who already are mentally ill, or the religion itself exasperates the situation. And I could see how people could get delusional with just the thoughts of an Armageddon. Then in my work, I've done more research with a lot of the different, like Carl Jung, Freud, in those arenas, and so it's interesting to put it side by side and look at it. But the research is out there, and yes, I saw a lot of mental illness. The hospitals in California were very close to, well, a lot of the mental hospitals were close to the area that I grew up in. So we had a big percentage of people who suffered from depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, and other, a lot of depression.
I think you mentioned something important, that the religion and the phantasaical mythology that they teach is like impending doom, basically exacerbates these problems, because like the stress you have from everyday life for someone who's just has anxiety, which is totally common. I imagine like Armageddon coming and all your friends and neighbors dying isn't exactly helpful, let alone like anything more serious.
Yeah, it isn't a very healthy place for children, that's for sure. And I saw the comment, it's exhausting. And yes, it's extremely exhausting. There's no time, because you're always on edge to enjoy the simple things in life. You always felt like, oh, I need to be doing more. And for some people, if they have a sensitive disposition, it will push them over the edge. There was a lot.
Yeah.
We took care of so many sisters who were suffering from nervous breakdowns. And it was just the saddest thing to see growing up. It was just, my mother suffered from a nervous breakdown. We had many people that were coming through where they would stay and we would have to take care of their children while the mom was in the hospital.
So are you working in this healthcare situation?
Yes, in fact, we had foster children too, and we had 2 foster children. One of the boys
in our home. Okay.
And his mother was in the home across the street, and she was a witness, and it was
oh wow.
So his sister was with us for a little while, and then she went on and she was placed in other witness homes. And there are more. I saw a lot more of that situation too.
It's such an interesting reality that you lived, where many Jehovah's Witnesses, including the family of the leadership of the church, were in a mental health care situation across the street from you. It's like you couldn't write you couldn't write a more blatant, like silly trope probably in a fiction, that like this is how does this religion exist? Oh well, half the people are in mental health care because the stress of Armageddon and imposing doom.
Yeah, it's a doomsday cult. I mean, and there was trailers everywhere. That sometimes they would just go and he would have different properties and checking in on all these people. Sometimes I would go to another property and there was other people in other on that property and living in, just they had to be taken care of. So it was probably a lot bigger than my little world. I only knew my little street, but I saw a bigger picture and realized it later on. But a lot of funny things happen, and lots of funny things. So, I mean, we used to crack up about some of the things that would happen with the old people. So,
There's a couple
and
more things in the story in the bullet points here about Michael Jackson and then the end of the world. Can you discuss what was happening with Michael Jackson at the
oh, okay.
hall?
Okay, Woodland Hills Assembly Hall. I became a worker as a child in the cafeteria. I used to go crack eggs in the morning. And I saw commotion in the main hall. I was coming in from the kitchen, and that he was surrounded by people. And then my spiritual father, who ran the home, he came over and said, "Kerry, we have a job for you. Come with me." He took me to the dining room, and then Michael Jackson comes walking in. They closed off everything, and they said, "Don't let anybody enter in, and just give him what he needs." And so I had an afternoon with him in the assembly hall, and he was a very, very kind person. At the time, I didn't know who he was. I didn't know how famous he was.
How old were
I was
you?
a star. I was like 12, 10.
You're hanging out with the king of pop. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I hung out with the king of pop when I was like 11. Yeah.
But you said there was some scene was happening, and was it like a negative situation?
They wanted his, there were young people around him, and everybody was like, "Oh, Michael Jackson, oh my, can I have your autograph?"
Okay.
Kind of thing. It was kind of a
Gotcha,
mob.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Oh,
If
okay.
you,
Oh, so
he
you're
was
protecting
being
Michael from
mob.
the mob?
Yeah, I was protecting Michael from the
That's so
mob.
funny.
Yes.
Okay, that's funny.
Yes.
Because it said it was causing a scene, and I was like, what did Michael do at this assembly hall that you? It was just a normal King of Pop scene. It wasn't like a
It
drama.
was a normal
Okay.
king of pop scene. Yeah. And I'm sure the brothers were going, "Oh my God," like,
We're not equipped for this.
yeah.
Okay. So then there was another part where you were pioneering. Is that right? You became a pioneer at some point.
Yeah. I
Can you talk
started.
about that and then like how 1975 and the Stay Alive to 1975 thing played a role?
Let's see. Okay. For 1975, I had joined the Theocratic Ministry School. So this will be before I started pioneering. So I was around 10 or 11 at this time. I started to become very, very active. I was going out in field service. I was going, and I befriended one of the pioneer sisters, and she had this old beetle bug, and it was fun to go in her car. But she was a devout believer that 1975 was going to be the year that the world was going to end.
This is a
And so
devout
when
pioneer who preaches every day, who really, really
yes,
believes the end of the world is going to be in 1975 exactly.
right. So
Okay.
my first talk was with her, and I wrote my talk. I did all the research, and I found the scriptures that said we have to wait on God. We don't know the day or the hour. And she changed my talk at the end to back to, well, just in case it happens tomorrow, I will still be ready. And I'm all, "You just changed my talk, lady." The organization was trying to pull away from that Stay Alive till 1975 and all the commotion. They were trying to blame it on the people and
Crazy
not,
pioneers, crazy
yeah,
believers who actually like
crazy
sold
believers.
it.
And they sold their houses, and now they become a detriment to us.
Idiots who
Yeah.
really believed us.
Yeah. So yeah, she was one of those. And yeah, so it was quite, I look back at it now and go, they use this little girl to tell everybody, "You must wait on Jehovah." So that was my first talk. And then
So
I
did you
started,
recognize at that moment that you were sort of a voice of propaganda, like being used as a tool?
kind kind of. I was pretty intuitive as a child. And I was like, okay, well, because I wasn't always a Jehovah's Witness. I became one my mom became one when I was 7 years old.
That's
So
kind of the same thing for my family. I was about that age when my dad started taking the religion seriously and going, and then eventually like dragged us and our mom along.
yeah.
So
So I had a foundation of maybe some critical thinking. So giving that talk for me was like, I'm helping them. I'm helping them to wake up that 1975 was just a date and wasn't going to ever happen. So um, I kind of felt like, no, they needed me. So it
mm.
made me feel
You were the
wanted.
voice of reason as a young teenager.
I was.
You're like, all these pioneers are actually kind of nuts, and the leadership are friends with people that have schizophrenia, and half the people I know are in mental health situations. So, man, they really
Yeah,
need someone stable like me who just joined the religion, who can see through it all.
we see this man in the middle of the street fighting raindrops from the sky.
Actually, for me, they were like pitching that there was a bit of data. And so I did the math because I was like, I'm in math and I'm learning algebra. And the data that they're publishing in the yearly yearbooks saying the people that drink the wine at memorial, they're the people that were transformed into super powerful angelic beings to rule over us as overlords in space. And I was like, well, if that's true, I don't know anyone who's drinking the wine, but like this book says there's this many people in it, and like the numbers like slowly going down every year. And so if I take this graph and I plot the trajectory of people that are doing less and less people are doing this because they're dying. So like pretty soon all the people are going to be dead, and that means it looks like in about 6 to 10 years, 1992-ish, I'm thinking about this. 6 to 10 years, like that's going to be the end of the world, because that will be all the people in heaven will be ruling over us, all 144,000, and then that's the end. So I was like, that's one of the reasons I got baptized, because I was like, I mean, there's less and less people drinking the wine, so that's their new, I was like inventing my own date because of the stuff that they were publishing. And then there's someone in the comments says like the new year is 2033. There was 2014 at some point. Year 2000 was a big year because everyone else in the world was talking about that being the end of the world. 2012, of course, with like the Mayan calendar, and like there's always this like, well, maybe that's going to be the end. Well, maybe that's going to be the end. And they're a little bit softer about it because now they just say it's imminent. It's happening tomorrow. The pandemic was huge for the Jehovah's Witnesses, right? Like everyone's talking about that being the real end. So anyway, okay. Sorry, I interrupted you and ranted.
That's okay.
So 1975.
Yeah, so that was a very interesting time because my mom got baptized in 1975, so we were coming in.
Mm.
So that was very strange. So, looking back at it all, it's like interesting. It was an interesting childhood, to say the least. But we did do some fun things. We would go camping. We went. It's where I fell in love with the forest. It was with them, and had some good times. Going up to the rivers up there, and going to the beach and just hanging out. I was hanging out with old people, but it was fun. It was fun.
It's actually something I missed after getting out of the religion. I was like, oh, all my friends are my age or younger. That's like, I miss old people in general. Like, where do I find old people who aren't just in a church somewhere? Like, those are someone else's grandparents. Like, the congregation provided everyone's grandparents to me, which I thought was really nice, actually. Like, I missed that for a few years after leaving.
Yeah. Yeah. But later on, I ended up pioneering. I got married. I was auxiliary pioneering in high school. On those special months. I had gotten baptized in 1985. And then started pioneering and got married, and I was regular pioneering. And then I was expecting our first child. And my pioneer sister got pregnant. My pioneer sister partner got pregnant out of wedlock. And of course, you don't know all the details. It was just like, oh, she's pregnant. I didn't even know. I didn't even know she had a boyfriend. It was kind of a strange thing. But I shunned her because I had to. And I heard through the grapevine that she had a meeting to ask for a reinstatement. She was 7 months pregnant, and I was around 7 months pregnant too.
Who is
And
this
I
again?
go,
Sorry, just to be super clear.
to be clear, this was a young sister in our
Okay,
congregation, my
gotcha.
new congregation that I went to after we got married. So I was befriending her, and
Yeah,
she was a service partner.
gotcha.
And so the phone rang at my mom's house. My mom answered the phone, and she said she's dead. She shot herself in the heart. And I
Oh,
went,
wow.
who? And I knew it was her. And all of a sudden I felt my legs give out on me, and I fell on the floor, and I was devastated.
Wow. So
They
tragic.
said, the gossip started. They said she wasn't going to have a memorial because she unalived herself, and that she wasn't going to be resurrected. I went
Wow.
to a gathering, and these were the things that were being said. And I got infuriated. I looked at the group of sisters that were talking, and I said to them, you cannot read her heart, and you don't know. And I walked out. And I just felt the blood going up through. I probably had a fever that night. My poor child. I traumatized my unborn child.
Wow.
No, it was
It's
devastating. And for me, it was even, I shunned her. So I kind of felt responsible. I had that, like, we had this horrible group decision to torture somebody emotionally. And working with the people in that home, I saw that happen time and time again. The reason they were in there was because they were being tortured, they were being abused, they were being disfellowshipped. There was one anointed sister that was in that home who was disfellowshipped because she spoke her mind to the brothers, and they thought she should be quiet. The reason I know that is because I have a letter that explains it in my files. But so later in life, when I found out and I read her disfellowshipping letter, and I'm like, because I had access to it later after my father-in-law passed away. It's just incredible that they basically are kind of mafia, like, okay, everybody has to treat this person horrible. We're going to give them the silent treatment. Well, it
right. Like
causes people to unalive themselves.
yeah, it's actually really common, and it's shocking how many people die by suicide in the religion, and then or just after being kicked out under the pressure from the punishment in the religion.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
disgusting, and I think there needs to be studies done on it. We just did another interview this week with another YouTuber show host, Steph, from Steph Woke Up, where she talks about like 6 different suicides that happened in her own congregation, some of them her own family members. And like she's a quote, like, people are literally dying to get out of this religion, or because of this religion. But it's obviously a little bit of a joke, a dark joke, but like, it's so common, and I don't think there's actual numbers on it, because who's doing official reports that, like, oh, this is from shunning? Like, most people don't even know that shunning is real, or how it works, or how extreme it is.
Yeah, it is. It's torturous. It's horrible. So, I guess I could move on, because that was the beginning of the darkness that I was going to experience.
Oh, wow. Okay, let's go to the next one. Next dark
See.
chapter.
Yeah, felt good to write it.
Yeah.
It felt really good to write it.
Where did you write it? In your memoir that you're working
Yeah,
on?
it's yes, all in my drafts.
Yeah.
So
well, we have no voice, right? So like, in that religion, and after getting punished after leaving, they basically don't want you to ever talk about the religion in any kind of negative light. But there's so much to say. There was so much to say while we were in it, and there's even more to say now that we're out and we have this freedom. But it's like, well, who's listening? So there's great paths to take. That could be a YouTube channel, or writing a memoir, or writing a novel where you turn the story into something compelling, more compelling than the real thing. Maybe I'm speaking in Spanish. Tal vez. But yeah, okay. So next chapter. Thanks for writing something. I'm excited that it's going to come out someday.
I could. There was one part that we skipped over. I knew Reinhard Langtag. Reinhard Langtag would come visit our congregation, and I should probably talk about him because I knew him right before I got married. And
was he a prominent figure in the religion?
Yes, he was. He was on the writing department. He wrote the Watchtower articles.
Oh wow.
He was at Bethel, and he wrote even some of the smaller books.
It's interesting because that almost no one knows, because they're ghostwriters with the Jehovah's Witness Watchtower organization. The Watchtower Bible and Tract Society is a publishing company, and they never publish the name of the author. And sometimes it's usually one person, but sometimes it's edited by a larger group or something. But there was a guy I knew who has like the largest library of Jehovah's Witness literature outside of the actual headquarters. His name was Alan Feuerbacher. He was a big activist in the 80s and 90s through news groups before we had web pages. But he's very vocal and he's written a lot. But he had like a whole separate shelf of books where the Jehovah's Witnesses were plagiarizing literature. And it was like, this is the source library for the Watchtower. And due to his research, he found out who had ghostwritten so much of the literature and who had borrowed ideas from this person and that person and then adapted it to the Jehovah's Witness mythology. And so it's really interesting that you're like, this guy wrote some of the literature, or a lot of literature, at this period of time.
You guys may remember this.
The Aid to Bible Understanding is the name of that book you're holding up?
Yes.
Where did you get that, and who gets that in the
religion? Okay. This was the book that Reinhardt was involved in, the Aid book. This was the book, this was the encyclopedia that they used for study, and this was pre Insight on the Scriptures.
Oh, okay.
So this was the first one. And this is where the research came into play. And there were Dunlard was one of the brothers. I think he was kicked out. He was on the committee. Reinhardt was on the committee, and there was another brother in the committee. And if you look it up in the index of Crisis of Conscience, Ray Franz goes into detail on those three brothers. They basically, the issue was 607 BCE and 587. And when they started to do their research, Reinhardt was involved with that. And they found out that their date was wrong. And basically the organization wanted to cover it up, flushed it under the rug. So the three brothers, one got disfellowshipped. I think the second one was disfellowshipped, but I'm not going to, one of them was, there could have been two that were disfellowshipped. However, Reinhardt left quietly. He didn't want to be disfellowshipped. I know he was interrogated.
And this is all because of the false archaeological dates that they used to prove that 1914 was the date that Jesus came back to heaven invisibly, like he already was. They used to say 1940 was like going to be the end of the world, 1914, but actually it didn't happen. So their retraction was, well, he just came invisibly, but like, wasn't he there like 3 days after he died on the stake and or cross in like year 33 or whatever? So
it was, yeah. So
they try to prove that date was still important somehow by adjusting the time that Jerusalem was destroyed, but we have an outrageous amount of archaeological data and everyone knows from historical records and archaeology that it was actually 587, not 607. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. And as a researcher and a historian, when you get corrected on something, um, scientifically or by archaeology, an organization has a hard time accepting those types of facts. Well, look at the evolution book, for example.
Yeah, Creation and
And
Evolution by Jehovah's Witnesses. That book
yeah,
is filled with misquotes and
yeah,
inconsistencies with reality.
yeah. So he was friends with a brother and sister who came from Bethel that were in our congregation, and um, the wife of his friend, Etta studied with me before I got baptized, and I really enjoyed those studies because there was something that happened with her that was quite funny. Where I was kind of like, okay, here we are going to do this study. It's like all by the book and everything. And I just looked at her one day and I said, Etta, I really don't see the reason why I need to turn in field service time. I really think they're just being nosy. And
Yeah,
she went,
I actually,
whoa, Kerry.
yeah, I had that same thought when I was coming. I kind of left the religion and came back, and I decided to. My dad was like, "Auxiliary pioneer, even if you don't believe a lot of it." I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, and I was like,
So
"Well,
she
if I'm an
closed.
aux pioneer, I'm never going to turn in my time because they won't accept me anyways as an aux pioneer officially." So I didn't do it as like a protest. Like, also, why do we turn in time? Like, what did we need this for?
What's the point? I mean, I just felt kind of like, gosh, I have so many things to do. I have a teenager and I have a boyfriend. I don't want to feel no. Anyway, she closed the book and we just started reading the book of Proverbs after that. So and then we just talked about life, and
This is your prep for baptism. It was just
yeah,
like
this was my
hanging out.
prep. It was hanging out. It was really a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. She passed away recently. But her husband, Cal and Reinhardt, were friends, and they used to get into heated discussions about the things that were going on and back at Bethel. And I'm sure that the 607 was a big issue, of course, because he left quietly and moved to Tacoma. So we went up and visited him. And for the assembly, my brother and I stayed with Reinhardt, and we went to the assembly at the Tacoma Dome. And then after the assembly, we went further up to Victoria with my grandfather. My grandfather was not a witness, but he never tried to interfere because he felt, there's some things that she could learn from these people. He was just a fantastic grandfather. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because when later on Reinhardt came back and he gave a talk.
So you were saying he left. You were saying he left the headquarters and the writing
He
department,
left headquarters.
but he was still in the religion.
He was still in the religion. In
Okay.
fact, I think he was still writing, because he was a very modest man. And I'll never forget, he only had a card table, a chair, and a typewriter in his living room. And I was like, whoa, just those things. So,
It's actually like a author's, like a romantic scene that you just painted, actually. Like just one guy in an empty room with a typewriter on a like a really basic table.
Yeah.
It's like a poetic like image.
I drew something out of memory, just in pencil, of what I saw in that room. The style. It was just a quick little drawing, and I put it in my journal just so that I would have it for memory. For memory's sake, maybe put it in my memoir later. But he gave a talk in our congregation on unconditional love. And it profoundly affected me.
How so?
Because, I realized that our love for one another was conditioned upon how we performed, how much we performed.
Right, marking your time, turning it in.
Yeah,
judging people if they didn't do it.
Yeah, and looking down on people if they didn't reach their time or they didn't do certain things. And it bothered me. So to have Reinhardt get up there and give a talk on unconditional love, he had no notes or anything. He just went up there and just gave this talk. I had goosebumps going down my body. And when he walked off that stage, he glared. He just glared at his friend. And I was like, oh boy, they must have been in an argument. Because we heard, I mean, being that close knit, you know, we would hear, you know, they got, you know, after the meeting, you know, all talking, yeah, they got a really big fight, you know.
Jehovah's Witness
just
battles are like maintaining
drama.
your position and then giving a talk like 7 months later.
Yeah. Yes.
The men are fighting.
This talk. Kind of like the organization. Oh, we're going to have a talk on 1975. We're going to have this like little 11-year-old girl give the talk.
Right.
Yeah.
We're going to show them.
We're going to show them. Yeah. They created a monster.
It is really interesting because I feel like the dark thing you already shared about the pregnant woman who you and others in your community were shunning, who then killed herself. That was exactly how extreme they get about conditional love, right? That's an outrageous, tragic end, all too common end to someone's story, is that their form of love is conditional, which ultimately shunning is hatred, right? You're like, let's focus all of our hateful energy possible on this human being until they kill themselves.
Or until they do exactly what we want them to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Which some people do. They come crawling back and conform to this thing, conform to the way
It's almost as if they're taking somebody into a field and whipping them.
Do what we want, or it's going to happen again.
Yeah, I mean, it's that form of torture, and that's what I would liken it to. And the silent treatment is just as bad with families. You know, let's not talk to them for years because they're not thinking like us.
Right.
That's completely wrong.
How many years in are you to this punishment?
Huh?
How many years in have you been treated with this punishment? Family not talking to you for years until they conform.
Yeah.
Are you shunned?
Yes, I'm shunned by some family members, and it's been almost a decade.
Okay.
And I'm a fader, and I was not a person to speak out. I just figure my grandmother told me a long time ago, let them go on their merry way. And I went, okay, even if I'm so bitter, okay. I got over the bitterness, but in my own way. But I was like, okay, fine. You know, that's what they want. That's what they want to do. I respect that. That's what they want to do. But in turn, they're treating other people bad because you're not like them. It's like, oh, you don't play in my sandbox, therefore I'm going to treat you like a horrible person and tell everybody how horrible you are. You know, it's just, you know, in this day in society, I think we've risen above that. But it still is going on. But I will have to give kudos to my mother because she never bowed down to that sort of tactic ever. And she used to get persecuted for not going by all the rules. So, but she taught my brother and I very well. But I slipped, and there was something that happened in my life that I'm very ashamed of, just like with what happened with my, I shunned. And there's a part of my life that I think we could probably go into it if you want to.
Yeah, let's go.
Where I had to make the decision to shun my own father.
What was the situation? Like, why was he the focus of punishment?
This is really, there's a lot packed in here. A lot happened in a short period of time. I'm pregnant with my second child. I'm regular pioneering. And 2 weeks before the Pioneer School, I have two brothers unannounced come and ask me about my personal life with my husband, and they take my husband's privileges away because of wifely duties. So that's where I'll stop that.
Can you
Then
explain wifely duties real quick?
wifely duties, they want to be in your bedroom and tell the wives what they can and cannot do in your marriage arrangement. And I was like, wait, what? What's going on? I'm pregnant. And I'm about to have this baby. So there was some wifely duties you cannot do and some that are easier to do. So they have a thing, at that time they had a thing about oral sex. And so yeah, if I didn't know if you did those sorts of things that you would get in trouble for them. And because I was an outstanding person in the congregation and that they found out about it, they left that afternoon and I said, well, can I still go to Pioneer School? And they're like, well, we have to meet with each other and we will let you know. I was like, whoa, what just happened? It was quite, yeah, it was quite shocking. And looking back at it, I'm like, to put a young pregnant woman by herself without her husband being there and start talking, show up all of a sudden and talk about things that are private is very invasive and abusive.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So
And also
incidentally,
comment. Also, it's not extreme situation for you.
yeah,
This is what the elders do to almost every single woman in this religion. I've not heard a woman who didn't get interrogated about some part of her sexual life at some point in her time as a witness,
yeah, yeah. So
which is creepy because like they can't masturbate, they can't have sex before marriage. A lot of these are young men. A lot of them are in unhappy marriages, and they're talking to every woman in their community about stuff that's secret and happening in the bedroom to extreme details. Like it's
yeah,
almost like
yeah.
they get to imagine the porno of the women they actually know in every relationship. Like there's something really disgusting about it, right?
It was really disgusting. I lost all respect for them. I was like, oh my God, I can't. And then, but I was still trying because I was regular pioneering. I had family, my husband's family were, they were circuit and district overseers, and my husband's father and mother were Gilead missionaries, and so we'll get into that too. But let me finish what happened with my dad.
Yeah.
He had a neutrality issue, and he's had the same job his entire career. He So for them to just like come out of the blue and say, oh, we need to know what you do for a living, and it was something that he couldn't talk about, um,
Yeah, this
because it
is
was
weird,
top
right?
secret.
Like here's this bizarre interrogation now to a
Yeah,
man. It's not just about sexual stuff, but now the man's career. So they
yeah,
have
and
to know, like it's like Stasi in the East German or the communist time, right? Like
yeah,
why
it's
do you
like,
care so much about this information? Like what are you getting from this?
yeah, they're like, so, and if my father would to talk about what he did for the government, he would go to jail.
Right. If people don't know, I work in some aerospace engineering work,
Yeah,
and for
yeah,
some of
so
it, you need to have a security clearance, and it's not just like, oh, you're working on weapons. It's like technology in general, or like some
technology.
small piece of some gigantic, huge nationwide project. And sometimes it's not just the nation; it's like ITAR. So it's like the closer allies, or even like the 120 countries who are aligned with the United States. Like there's certain information just like you're not supposed to tell, and if you do get caught telling them, you lose your job. So, and it's not necessarily military. In your dad's case, it was something really benign that we all use today, right?
Yeah, he did a few things, and he's declassified now.
Yeah,
But he worked on our first GPS for the military, but it was within a company. It was just funded by the military
yeah,
because it was GPS,
right.
and it's used for
Global
everybody.
positioning system. It's like what we use for. It's what powers Google Maps now.
Yeah,
Some
so
some version of it.
yeah, it was a version of it. It was to identify an identification of aircraft. And then he worked, and he was they were the inventors of the black boxes on all aircraft.
Aircraft. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
so the black box is that is the box that they go look for after aircraft is shot down or
Yeah,
go.
has all the
It
data
has,
that
it has all the
chronicles
data.
the last
Yeah,
moments to find out what caused the aircraft to go down, whether it was an
yeah,
explosion or a thing that starts on fire or a malfunctioning electronic system or something.
yeah. So it actually saves lives
Yeah.
too, because you also have to identify yourself when you're in the air, and if you don't, you could be I want to use the word UFO, but an unidentified flying object
Right.
is
And they
something
might,
that
in the
don't
military,
yeah, if you don't identify yourself, you are at risk to be being shot down
right.
because of you know the times that we live in.
Hmm.
And during those years, this was stuff that was just you weren't they just didn't talk about it because they weren't allowed to. So to have them come and interrogate my father, and they gave him an ultimatum: either we're going to disfellowship you if you don't tell us what you do, or you must disassociate. And my dad was like, oh, well, he talked and was like, I mean, what's the worst thing? If I disassociate, well, maybe I'll still have my family. But I get interrogated next by them saying, well, you have these positions as in the organization, you're a regular pioneer, and you could be punished as well if you don't shun him. And I'm like, oh, so I was basically when I was very I guess I was devoted, I guess, at the time. I was strong, what they call strong in the truth, right?
Hmm.
So I shunned my father. I took a stand. I thought, okay, I have to take a stand, because if I don't take a stand, then I'm going to get punished, and I'm going to lose everybody else, and they're going to disfellowship me. And I, I was like, this is hard. So I, yeah, so that happened. So I shunned my own father for about a year and a few months.
Wow. Did you were living in the same home at that point? Or no, you're married with kids at that point, right?
I was married, and I had my second child, and I went out and I visited my grandparents, and the grandmother was she was hearing what was happening,
Hmm.
um, and she wrote me a letter. I still have the letter right here. So she wrote me this letter.
Do you want to read it?
Yeah, I will read part of it.
Okay.
It's like 5 pages, 5 pages in her
Oh, okay.
handwriting.
Okay.
Okay, so what I did is I typed out the part that I thought people would be interested in hearing,
Yeah.
and I'll read to you guys what she wrote me. And I'll put it July 29th, 1991. Dear Kerry, I'm so glad you have a nice life and enjoying all the things you have. Maybe sometime we can see more of you. We enjoyed it when you came out to see us. However, when our son had to make a choice of his livelihood or his religion, it became difficult for us. As a mother, you can understand, I'm sure. We give unconditional love to our kids, no matter what, they come first in our lives. I know how deeply hurt your dad has been. He's such a good person, Kerry. He has loved you and your brother with all his heart. He has made a difficult choice to provide for all the material things it takes for this life. His career has been his life for many years. Too much at stake to give it all up now. He's entitled to reap a few benefits for all his effort and schooling. These past years of sacrificing he had to make these past years of sacrificing he had to make. All of our friends always thought so much of your dad, and many of them always said that when they made him, they threw away the mold. our whole family just loves him to death and always will. He certainly has been a wonderful son, a good husband, and a good father. And in life, you can't ask much more than that. So
And this
that
is
was the
again
letter.
from who
This
exactly?
this is from my grandmother,
His mother.
his mother.
It's beautiful and human.
Very human. And then she goes on later on and she talks about how wonderful that they have been and how they've taken him up to the mountains and they spent time in the sequoias together. And it was heart-wrenching to the point where all of a sudden, I don't know why it popped in my mind, but at the time we had moved congregations, we moved cities. When we were now in Reby Jackson's congregation.
This is
And
the Michael Jackson's sister, right? Who's still a
yes.
Jehovah's Witness, or was at that time.
So, and even one of her daughters was babysitting our children. And I was going out in field service with her because I was still, I was involved. Had just gone to pioneer school. And let's see, I was tormented over this letter. And I thought about her and Michael. And I remembered, well, he's disassociated. So I'm going to ask her how she deals with it. I am struggling. My intuition is telling me I'm doing something wrong. So I'm having the conflict. And it was causing me to have depression. I was like, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel right. And then getting this letter from my grandmother is just like, whoa, wait, what's going on?
Like
So
she's trying to do an intervention with you personally, almost at that point.
she was doing an intervention.
And you're experiencing basically cognitive dissonance. Does that sound accurate? Yeah. Internal turmoil between two different opposing ideas.
Yes. Yeah. Because all of a sudden I remember how loving my grandparents were and everything that they've done for me. So it basically woke me up in a way. So I go to the hall, like, how am I going to handle this? I walk up to Reby and I'm like, Reby, I want to ask you something, kind of personal because I'm struggling. How do you deal with not talking to your brother because he's disassociated? And she just looked at me strange, like, what are you talking about? I would never let some man tell me that I can't talk to my own brother. Just like that. And she was mad. I'm like, oh. And I was just like, okay, I just had my grandmother, and now this woman who I deeply respected tells me I'm doing something wrong.
By following the leadership's mandate, you have to never talk to your father again and for the rest of your life.
Yeah, because
right?
He's not doing what we're telling him to do, And I'm like, yeah, well, there are two sets of rules here. What's going on? I was mad. I came home from the hall. My husband wasn't going anymore after that. And I'm like, you know what? I'm calling my dad. And my husband looked at me and I said, I'm not doing this anymore. So I welcomed my dad back into my life. And we never let them come in between our family unit ever again. And that's when we started fading. Was then.
Interesting. And this is early 90s at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In your family. I don't want to point too much of a finger at celebrities, but it is interesting. I think the fact that you just happen to be close to someone who was dealing with the same exact situation, just happened to be the world's most famous pop star ever and his sister. But in a way, that being so public, I think is super interesting. That in a way, okay, here's these small people who have basically nothing to show for their lives, a boys' club in a weird church cult fringe part of society, right? The Jehovah's Witnesses. But then you have the world's most famous pop star being punished by this religion and the people in it. And then to have the sister say, No, like I'm not gonna not talk to Michael because of something these people say. I'm not gonna let it destroy my family. In a way, like to this day, like the legacy of the Jackson family being so public is still pulling people out of this religion, is still informing people of the decisions they're making in their immediate family. I think that
Right.
that's an interesting point to make.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's why I tell the story. Um, because I was just in a situation like that. And it is interesting because she became a pillar of strength for me. And if she didn't let those men uh, push her around, then I certainly wasn't going to let that happen anymore either.
the Reby Jackson for the resistance. Nice job.
Yeah, the resistance.
Okay, so thank you to the Jacksons. There's okay. Well, yeah, I'll let you guide us to the next thing. But in the bullet points, there's a
Let's
very
see what.
very interesting part of your life. So now you're basically fading from the religion,
Yeah.
and we titled
Okay.
the video about a near death experience. Is there anything
Okay.
before that you want to talk about, or are you ready to go into
Yeah.
the
Let's go into this one because people can listen to the Barbara Anderson interview if they want to know some of the other stuff. So, but let's go into that. I was suffering from depression at this point because we again moved after it was after the earthquake, the California earthquake, and we got this good deal on a house back in our hometown, which probably wasn't the best place to move because now we're all surrounded by everybody all over again. So they're
the
constantly at
active
my door.
Jehovah's Witnesses that you knew
Yes,
growing up?
knocking on my door every week, knocking on my door. Why
Wow,
aren't you coming
so
back?
so
We're so
frustrating.
worried. You're gonna die. Family crying. You're gonna, and then them telling my children that we were gonna die in Armageddon, and my children
Wow.
getting all upset.
Life hack
And
to anyone out there who's going through this: move to the next town over if you can.
if
If at
you
least,
possibly can
yeah.
move and you want to fade, I think that is good because it's easier to cut them off, and you're not seeing them at the grocery store, and
Right.
it's just
And they're
easier to
not
put
not
arm's
harassing
length.
your kids about the end of the world all the time. It's scaring them.
That yes, yes, and I'll get to that. So I'm going through this depression. So I start therapy. I'm like, okay, I got to get into therapy because I'm not shaking this, because I'm disappointing my family and friends, and I'm having this compassion that they're they're mourning me. I'm going to already, and they're very sad. So I start to feel guilty, and even though I knew what I wanted to do, I still felt like I was being trapped, and because it was constantly in my face. So I get into therapy, and they see what's going on, and they start me to take some antidepressants. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll take the antidepressants. The only thing is, the antidepressants, they put me on a too much of a higher dose, and I stop sleeping. So if a person stops sleeping for days and then doesn't eat, drink, and they're awake, your body starts to shut down.
Yeah,
So
I think
that's
you'll
what was
die
happening.
in like 10 days if you don't sleep. Like,
Right.
yeah, it's
So
super
I didn't
important.
sleep. It's super important. So I didn't sleep for 5 days. I continued taking my antidepressants. So it was causing it to get even worse. So the doctor subscribed something to help me sleep, but it wasn't working. And then I almost died. Um,
Oh wow, from the medication you almost died. This is supposed to help you, and
it's
they're
supposed to
killing
help
you.
me.
Wow.
Yeah, I almost died, and I didn't realize that it was a near death experience until I did research later, and all the symptoms. But when they did get me to the hospital, they said I was lucky that I was alive because my heart rate, I had been awake for 5 days, and my heart rate was like 155 beats a minute. And they were like,
It's
oh
really
God,
high.
we got to get her. We got to
I
get
think
her.
healthy peak at my age, which I'm 43 now, is like 165. That's peak. like if you're exercising on a bike or running at your
but not
maximum,
resting.
not resting speed.
No, not resting. So yeah, I mean, I could go into detail about what that felt like.
Yeah, let's do it.
Um,
What did it feel like?
but yeah, it was like you're out of your body. I saw my body on the ground, and I was like
What
hovering.
was your okay, yeah, hovering. I was gonna say, what was your perspective? So you're like hovering over your
I
body
was
on the ground.
hovering. I saw my body on the ground. I was hovering, and I saw a white light, and I saw this hand come down and said, "Kerry, you can come now if you want to."
Whoa, that's like classic end
Oh
of
my,
life, the light
yeah,
tunnel experience,
yeah.
right? Like most people, a
It
lot of people
was
have
like,
had that.
yeah, a lot of people have had that happen. But it was very profound in the way that you see different things when you're in that state. So the colors were brighter. All of a sudden, there was an inner an inner dialogue going on where you're having this discussion with something else. It could be yourself. Like I said earlier, I've read like Carl Jung's The Red Book, and it was very similar. And
The
I've read
Red Book.
The Red
I'm a
Book.
big
It's a
fan of him.
yeah. If you look up
I've
The
never
Red
heard.
Book,
Okay.
by Carl Jung, um, and I didn't find it. And I've been able to find other esoteric type of literature that that describes in poetry or other writings, ancient writings,
Mhm.
and they talk about a oneness with the creator or a oneness that you feel. When I talked to the doctor, I told him it was kind of like a download. It felt like a computer downloading information. There you go. That's it. Um,
This actually
and
looks like your flower picture a little bit, a little
yeah,
decoration. Interesting.
yes, yeah, it is, right? So my artwork is very much esoteric in nature. Some of it is, not all of it, but some of it is. Um, so that experience made me want to expand more knowledge. So, and when you go through something like that where you almost lose your life, nothing else matters anymore, because when you're given a second chance to live, because I was like, no, I want to see my children grow up, and all of a sudden I felt myself go back in my body. I was like, boom, I'm back in my body.
Wow.
But what was so amazing was it was like I said, it was like something downloaded into me, and it gave me answers, like things that I shouldn't know, I all of a sudden knew.
Can you
And
give an example of one of those things?
oh gosh, it almost gave me an intuition where I could find it in printed form. Um,
Oh, like find similar information or find guidance on this topic.
yeah, yeah. So it sent me on a journey. It opened the door and sent me on this journey. One thing I was wondering about was like I was so fearful of Armageddon, and after that experience, I realized that Armageddon was never going to happen.
Okay.
It's like
Like you just
they're
knew
wrong.
it intuitively.
Intuitively, I knew there's gotta be something else about that. So I started to study symbolism, and then the philosophers, and I started to read those not so, we'll see, heresy. I started to read heresy. I became a pagan. No, I started to read different things. I decided to read what I was not allowed to read. I wanted to educate myself. And the first thing I did was I wanted to read some of the books of the Bible that were banned. I had
Yeah, like
this thing
that weren't
about,
included in the canon of the official Bible by essentially the early Catholic religion,
yeah.
right?
So
They
what
were
I,
deleted books from the collection of Jewish literature.
yeah, so what I learned that there was an outer circle and an inner circle. And there was what they call the few. And
Mm,
that's what they talk about in esoteric communities, where there is the outer message that Jesus taught, but then there was what he taught his apostles.
okay.
And then that is
So
what,
fascinating.
yeah, so that's what led me to Elaine Pagels and her work. So I started to follow her, and I have several books of her. She's a fascinating woman, and she really uh, broke down the Gnostic Gospels, and
Yeah.
when the what is it the Dead Sea Scrolls, the
Hmm.
Nun Would Not Be Library came out. They had a lot of biblical scholars that were dissecting all of that. So um, I just decided to just let my intuition guide me, and it's been a fantastic journey. Fantastic journey. There
Yeah.
she is.
Yeah, I was actually just watching a bunch of her interviews on Myth Vision podcast, which is a great podcast, by the way, with Derek Lambert, Myth Vision podcast. He interviews
Yes.
her, and he interviews a lot of people basically his story is generally he was a heroin addict, and then he recovered,
Yeah.
and then he got into trying to understand faith and religion and like in a really deep, profound way. So he brings all these experts. He brought her on, and I listened to a bunch of their interviews yesterday to prepare for this because I knew you're going to talk about her a little bit. And she's actually super interesting and really is an expert in her space. It seems like. So if anybody's
Yeah.
interested, go check out her and her work, her books.
Yeah. Yeah. They she was funny in one of her interviews. She gets called a heretic all the time. I say you should wear it with a badge of honor.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one thing she talked about in one of those interviews was like, well, if you read about Satan in the Bible and the serpent, and some people saying that they're the same character, but ultimately, like Satan's like God's favorite character. He had a job to do. He was a super powerful angel in charge of many angels, just like Jesus. So like Jesus and Satan are almost equals in a sense
Yeah.
for all eternity until like real recently. And God, anything that Satan did bad, God basically put him up to it. And she's just like, this is what it says. And I was like, that's what I realized after reading the Bible. Like the
Yeah.
reason I left the religion in part was that I realized like Satan is actually a really strong Christian character. And he didn't really do anything wrong except try to liberate humans. And she basically said exactly that. I was like, Elaine Pagels, she knows. She read the Bible. Not everyone does that. Not every Christian reads the Bible and actually realizes what reality is from that mythological perspective. Like Satan's actually a really strong character of the Christian story. So if you're a Satanist, you're still just a Christian.
Yeah. 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 And it's different than that. He's different than Lucifer. So
Oh, okay.
yeah. So it's a I don't know. I kind of liken the entire process of there's one main stream. There's a stream of spirituality, but there's all these little offshoots, right? These little streams that connect and feed into the mainstream. And if you ever have any question about anything, just go back to the source, the water source. But everybody's on these different little paths, and they may be like a little bit different because of culture or where you grew up or your, the part of the world. But they all are valuable and profound, or can be profound ways of a person's spirituality if that's their choice to come, to live their life. So um,
It's an interesting.
Jehovah's Witnesses are just one. They're
Mhm.
just one
Of
sort,
many.
because
Yeah.
I have met Jehovah's Witnesses who I still to this day felt they did have a spark of spirituality, and they were true believers in God. And I respect that is their tailored. Uh, that is their path, and that's okay. But what is happening with the organization in trying to morph people to think and be the same is completely wrong, because the God, if you want to call it the God source or the God power or whatever, you're here to experience your life, your way of thinking, and you're going to come to your conclusions in your own personal life, and it's tailored to you.
Yeah.
We're not to be carbon copies of each other. So I think that's why in a lot of like esoteric groups and such that I have studied, that's why they study all the different philosophers. They study many of the different mystery schools, because they all have they'll have a different ritual, or they'll have a different way of doing things. And it's good to glean from a lot of them, because you'll pick what sounds good to you. And so that you can live the best life that you want to live. But that's basically the whole thing with the near-death experience, and all of that it just opened my eyes that I could just be me, and I could be authentic, and I have my own purpose. And so I
What do
think
you? It's been a while since you had that near-death experience, but obviously it was a profound moment then, and it's still something you respect.
yeah.
It's valid for you. Could you describe now, after kind of living with that, having had that experience then in the what was mid or late 90s, like, what do you think it was? Was it your subconscious mind that you were like connecting with your deep intuition, or was it, in your perspective, something external to you? Like, how would you describe, what do you think that fountain of knowledge or stream that you were connected to in that moment was? Or what was the thing you were talking to, like communicating with?
I think it was the connection that we all have, that one spark that's inside everybody. I think that when I went through that in that near death, there's a possibility that when a person transitions, that they get welcomed back to the divine. Leonardo da Vinci said it best. I wrote down what he wrote. Learn to realize that we are all connected, or something to that effect. So I think that the dialogue was just the universe.
What does that mean to you, the universe?
That we are all connected. We're all part of this whole soup of wonderfulness, and we're in this avatar, but we have access to the divine at certain points mystically. And I think that that's what the mystics try to achieve, is a oneness with the divine.
How is divine different than the universe itself in your?
I don't think that there is any difference.
Okay.
I think it's all the same. Our universe. There's a book called The Three Initiates, and it talks about the seven hermetic principles. And one of the principles is the universe is mental. It's conscience. It's thinking. And we are just a divine spark of that. And humans at one time or another have understood that we are part of that. We are part of the universe, of that part of that mental universe. And there's times when that communication between the divine universe spark and yourself, mystics or philosophers will talk about, there have been times where they have had a communication or an inner dialogue with the divine. And that's what I've read in a lot of esoteric type of that, and that's what I have found in my research. And it gave me like solace or an understanding. Oh, okay, that's all it was. However, it was so profound that it changed my entire life. It changed my outlook on life. It changed what I thought was important. It changed, my fear went away. I had no more fear. I went, okay, because I'd had this horrible fear of death beforehand because I thought I was going to die, or Armageddon. But when I had the near-death experience, I went, oh, okay, well, maybe there is immortality of the soul. I still don't, I'm
I think
still.
that's a. Go ahead. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go
I'm
ahead.
still
Go
what?
ahead.
I want to know what you're gonna say. I'm still what?
I'm still researching it. I'm
Okay.
still learning every single day. I have I've connected with other people who study the same philosophies. And it's nice to know that I have gone, that happened in 1997. So I've studied all these years for 30 years, and I have now found the same, my research has, and when I talk to people who have researched the same thing, it's like we're on the same page.
Could you,
And
I guess, tell the audience, like if they wanted to dive into this, what have you found that you resonated with from your personal lived experience and your research? Just so if they want to go read a book or learn about this, you name dropped a bunch of things, but just to like put it into bullet points.
Yeah, name dropped. I really enjoyed Elaine Pagels. I really enjoyed her. There's so many different aspects of it. I'm looking at my library. I mean, Joseph
She wrote
Campbell.
3 books. Okay.
Huh?
Yeah, he's famous for
Joseph Campbell,
The Hero's Journey.
The Hero's Journey. If you follow the hero's journey, it's the same. It's kind of like when I went through it. I went through what they call I call it that dark moment. I would say that. Okay, this is kind of fun. Okay, when I had my near-death experience and I started to have that inner dialogue, I felt like that was a meeting with the goddess.
Mm.
Know thyself and you will know the universe and the gods.
Mm.
That's a famous.
Doesn't the serpent in the Garden of Eden say something like that?
Yeah.
Like if you eat that fruit, you'll have knowledge of good and bad, and you'll be like gods. It's almost exactly the phrasing.
Yeah, it is. So study the myths. Read more than when somebody only gives you an assigned reading list, you should be your first flag. I would go with what your intuition says. I mean, if you can get the same tap into the spiritual river through your religion, then that's your path. That's okay. But don't oppress other people because they decide to take a different path. Where it could be Brahmanism, it could be Buddhism, it could be Hindi, it could be Christian, it could be Jewish. They're all paths recognizing the same thing of but they have a different title for it. Some people will call it the universe, some people will call it God, some people will call it Jesus. That's just a title for this whole thing, this whole soup that we're in. So I kind of think that Joseph Campbell and the way he describes it, and he brings all these myths in it, he's saying it's basically the same story, just told many different ways.
There's a couple things that drew from my personal experience. I'm not advocating for this, but for me it was helpful. When I left the religion, I eventually, in a safe way, experimented with psilocybin, the chemical in psychedelic fungus mushrooms.
Yeah.
And there's like 137 different species that have that chemical all over the world. And that one wasn't so much that there was like a being, or it was more like things that are alive are communicating, including humans and plants and like the living ecosystem. is there's something happening, and we're a part of it. It was like the society in general shows that we're separate, or tries to tell us that we're above it, we're better than, but really we need to be in communication. We need to be touching it. We need to be like a part of it. And that was the teaching that I got from it. And then there's other chemicals that I've experimented with that are more like, it was more of a visual, like super curious visual thing, but at the same time it felt like a different being outside of myself was showing me something. Like, here is the thing I want to show you. And it's like all the stuff is moving, and I'm like, well, why does it feel like it's another intelligence? And that was interesting to me. And I'm more of a look within person now than a look without, because I feel like our subconscious world is profoundly full of wisdom and is always paying attention to things, and like where we get our intuitions from within. And I feel like maybe that's what it was, but you know, I'm just also a student of this life, so open to interpretation.
There was another book called The Immortality Key: The Secret History of the Religion with No Name. This was a very interesting book, and it kind of like goes into that. So these experiments with people have been going on for thousands and thousands of years, and the whole purpose of it, we would have the shamans. In this particular book, it was interesting because they were making he found that they were making beer, and there was some type of a fungus on the rye, and so when they would drink the beer, it would cause them to go into a state where they could commune with the universe. And so this is a really interesting book. I'm not advocating for people. The immortality.
Brian Murarasku. He's a really interesting guy. He's been on Joe Rogan. He's been on a bunch of other famous podcasts as well from other creators. If I recall, that particular chemical you're talking about with the rye, that is actually where scientists in the 1950s, 60s derived what's called acid, or LSD, is actually from that exact fungus. And so, and even the Salem witch trials, where all the women were burned at the stake for being witches, were actually, the going theory is that they were eating bread that had been from rye bread that had been infused with this fungus. And so people were actually like having mild trips, but it's actually that specific fungus is poisonous. So like LSD is a laboratory derived chemical that's pulled out of that fungus. So eating the actual fungus is probably not a good choice. There needs to be a different way to prepare it.
I think the meditation now for me is getting quiet, going within, and just being with myself. I'll still have, like, I'll get quick glimpses of remembrance of that time. So it reminds me, hey, hello, I'm still here. Remember what happened?
Okay.
But I don't think that there's a day that goes by that I realize that I have a second chance on life, so I want to make myself useful.
And that actually brings up a question, unless you wanted to continue. Sorry, I keep interrupting you.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay. So some people have a near-death experience, and they're like, oh my God, we live forever. Immortality is real, and there is a soul, and I'm going to land in the hands of God, or like be absorbed back into the universe, but I'll still be, so a lot of people have that reaction. But then other people have a reaction to, this life is short, I'm going to go do something with it now and help others, or I'm going to go write that book, or like they have this thing. I feel like you sort of have maybe a little bit of both of that, where you went and you're like, I'm going to tell my story, right? So like, did this experience help you to want to speak up?
Yes.
And how did you do that?
I wanted to speak up sooner. However, I felt I needed to be taught. I needed to learn some stuff. So that's why I decided to read a lot, study a lot, and raise my children, get them off into good schooling and everything. And then I thought, as soon as they're on their own and stuff, then I should be ready to share my story with the world. And And I always said when it happened, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write about this. I'm going to write a book. And it was at that time that my grandmother had given me our family heirlooms of journals with lots of stories. And that's what I'm basing one of my books on, is that. But I have been reading from those journals ever since it happened. And I pulled strength from it, because they in the journals, she would be dropping like information about philosophy and such. So I would get these little like Easter eggs, and I would take them and like, okay, I'm going to go research that and go study this now. So that's basically what I did, and it made me go down different rabbit holes, but esoterically speaking, I studied the mystics, the philosophers, I studied the Masons, I studied the Rosicrucians, I've studied, because the grandparents were Masons. So I went down that because I wanted to find out what was going on in that respect too. So, but when I found out that it was all about this inner, this inner knowledge of the few, I realized, well, what are they really talking about? What were the shamans really talking about? What were these ancient Essenes? What were they all about? And come to find out, they were doing different types of rituals, like the Essene Brotherhood, with Jesus was part of that Essene Brotherhood, and they had these types of rituals where they would actually try to be one with the divine. And if you go back and you look at what Jesus was doing with his ministry and these secret doctrines, this is actually what they were all trying to achieve, trying to tap in to the universe to gain access to truth. Truth is unchanging. It never changes. And that Blavatsky said that she said, there is no religion higher than truth. And that's very profound if you really think about it. There's no religion higher than truth. So it made me think of like what was really happening, like in the book of Revelation. Maybe like the book of Revelation was like this whole giant scene of some mystical experience where he was trying to explain his dark night of the soul and what he was going to learn from that. Is all very interesting when you start to look at it. Why was Jesus tempted and why did he go into the wilderness? What is the symbology of the wilderness? Wilderness is like, if you read Joseph Campbell, the wilderness is when you're like thrown out, you're like in darkness. You're in these dark woods. So what happens when you're in the dark woods? Well, you have to wait for the light. And what does the light represent? The light represents knowledge. It's interesting concept. So that's kind of like where my path has gone with all of that. It's been quite a ride. It's pretty interesting.
Like that last comment, that like this idea that you see the white light at the end of life or in a near-death experience, and for you, that moment, you felt like you learned something and were guided on a path to exploration and knew where to find information, and you went looking for it and found it. Like that was, what did you call it? Light is knowledge. I forget what you just said.
Yes, light is a representation of knowledge. It's an illumination. That's when you're in schools of philosophy or in the mystery schools, when somebody is illuminated with knowledge, it's considered light.
There's also something that's symbolic in the Egyptian world where there's rays of light. Trying to think, because Christians copied the Egyptians with the idea of like a halo above the head,
Yes.
or like this big golden disc behind the head. That's actually from Egyptian symbology, but Christians really like took it far for hundreds of years and like put it in a lot of art.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's super fascinating, this idea that light is information or enlightenment, or the idea of like we put a light bulb even today in modern culture, put a light bulb, ding, oh, I just had an idea. I have an inspired little like connection. I just made a connection.
Yeah. It's interesting when you put all the puzzle pieces together and you're like, oh. So yeah, I've gone back and reread a lot of the scriptures in relation to what I have pulled together knowledge-wise, and it paints a completely different picture than what we were taught as Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right. If you can
On
fully
my
reject Christianity as a whole after leaving it, and but then still recognize that the Jewish literature and the biblical information that's contained, people probably didn't have modern Christian ideas about what it is today, or what church represents, or how governments have like fused with religion over the centuries. They had a very
yeah,
different thing that's probably rooted more in something like what you're talking about, because they were like the modern, they were the the literate people, and they were probably, if they're writing it down, it was probably really important at the time, or something more profound or something. So there's wisdom. I guess my point is like there's wisdom in that old literature, and a lot of atheists. I consider myself more or less atheist, but I'm super curious about all this stuff. And like the God I worshipped as a child and prayed to, I don't think is real.
yeah,
But the like the greater concepts we're talking about, I think there's something maybe to it. But I wouldn't call it God. Anyway, all that to say, like, there's value in some of that old literature, and so not just throw away like all Bibles need to be burned. Like, no, like this is a part of the human story, and other religious holy books also are part of the human story, and that is something captured there.
yeah. I wrote down this one thought from Carl Jung, and he said it best: when one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscience. So you you one doesn't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscience, like awake.
Conscious,
So,
yeah.
and that particular thing just stood out to me. I wrote an article, and it's on my Medium. It's on my website. You can go to it, but it's on resurrection. What's the name of the article I wrote? The Great Pyramid and Resurrection, is there a connection?
Okay.
And I go into what the Essenes were talking about, and what the actual pyramid was actually used for. It was a a ritual for those who were in the Essene community, and they prepared a person their entire life to go through the ritual of being raised in the Great Pyramid. And it was where you had a symbolic death and you get raised in a resurrection. Yeah, that's it. It's towards the end there. Yeah. I wrote two articles, but that one and then that one will refer back to another article. And I wrote that like 4 or 5 years ago. I probably need to like go in there and fix up my grammar. But I wrote that talking about light of consciousness, or Christos. That because that was some of the things that I was learning through some of the research that I was doing at the time.
Interesting. So you're drawing connections and bringing up some ancient philosophy.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that you're doing that, because it's one thing to go and read these and come up with your own conclusions, but you're actually like spilling it back into society. Like, hey, check this out. This is a really interesting thing I found.
Yeah.
Not many people put something valuable on the internet, and I appreciate that when I find someone who does. So really cool.
Yeah. But anyway, it was so I kind of geeked out on some of these articles and stuff, but I don't know, it sprung a spark in me when that happened to me, and after all the research that I did, I was like, oh, and I found some people like, yeah, Kerry, you were right on. I'm like,
Cool.
okay.
Nice.
So
Some validation from the internet.
yeah, I had some validation from actual people.
So we have
Um,
Chronicles of Lucifer asking to please put the links for those articles. I will read those. And so this is actually on your website. We actually have the link in the description on the YouTube.
yeah.
This is kerrykaye.com, and it's spelled in a way that might not be obvious. So go click the link in the description of the video. But there's a link. If you go to the menu, there's a link for newsletter, IMDb, and media. What is, can we talk about your IMDb link? What is that for?
Oh, okay. My IMDb, I was donating my time as a photographer and filming for a dance company.
Okay.
And so through that, I got to do some extra photography for a short film. So they gave me an IMDb.
Oh, nice. And then I guess, so we should wrap up soon. We have about 10 minutes before the 2 hour mark. I would like to kind of highlight a little bit more of your modern work. And so you're a painter, you're working on your book, and maybe it's time to even talk more about your novel that you're workshopping.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
What do you think? What do you want to explore? I can show your website. Here's your IMDb of Moving On, the film you're in.
Yeah, I did some extra photography for that short film.
Oh, okay.
And
So more visual arts.
Yeah, visual arts. Yeah.
Cool.
And for my book, we didn't really touch on the First Amendment too much. On human
Can you
rights.
give us a brief on that? Because you had family that were involved in court cases. What's going on there?
Yeah. Okay. So my husband's grandfather went to court for the sound cars, and he
This
fought
Jehovah's
for the
Witness way of publicizing their dogma, basically their idea that death isn't real and we're all immortal beings and we're going to live on Earth. They were shouting that from cars with speakers back in the 1930s, I believe it was.
Yeah. So I was very proud to be part of an organization and a family who fought for freedom of speech and for freedoms for all. But of course, obviously, as I got older, I realized women didn't have the same freedoms within the organization. And when I left the organization, and I thought I would want to do more on that and speak up. And so my current work in progress is on women's rights in the 1860s and women's empowerment. It's vital and relevant today still. So I'm looking forward to getting that story out there.
And that's the book that takes place in the 1800s. There's a ship.
Yes.
So it's women on they're sailors, female sailors.
Well, they are being transported or migrated from the East Coast to the West Coast because it's right after the Civil War. And there was a lack of women on the West Coast and an overabundance of women on the East Coast because the war had killed, many of our young men. So they were going to the West Coast to help lay down roots. And a lot of these women became teachers, and they helped with the movements for women's suffrage. And I want to leave a legacy with this book. So I'm looking forward to finishing it. So I've got my eyes on it at the moment.
So you're deep in it. Could you give us a timeline? Is it 2024, 2025 release of this book? Do you have a title for it?
I'm on my 4th rewrite, and I want to start submitting it by fall. I'm animate. I want to start submitting it to publishers by this fall. So depending on if it gets picked up and we move forward with it, it could be 2 years, 3 years. I hate to say it could be that long, but that's the timeline when you're writing a book. However, if you follow me on my Substack and my Medium, I will be starting to put some of my stories that I have written, like short stories and stuff. I'm going to be republishing those. So, um, and oh yeah, and that is my Fine Art America. Oh, that is, I painted that ship when I was 12 years old in my class.
Oh wow.
So and it's very similar to the ship that is in my novel.
Cool.
Ironically, it's just
So
like
again,
coincidence.
that your young childhood self painted something that is now showing up in a book decades later.
I know.
So cool.
I could show you what.
I think you have such a cool like style. It's almost like it has such a consistency to it. You have these angelic beings, but they're almost fairy-like in a sense, and it's really kind of mystical.
Yeah,
Even an ancient shell that's early life on the planet had these similar structures, but it also looks like from a fantasy land. Somehow you create this
yeah.
like if
It holds
atmosphere.
the Nautilus. It holds the sacred geometry.
Yeah,
Here's
the mathematics,
my
this
ship.
Fibonacci sequence. Oh, you're showing
Yeah.
us on your. Let me bring you up full screen. Hold on.
This is just a quick little. Sketch I did of the ship that
Okay.
my novel's going to be.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're an incredible artist. Very impressed.
Thank you.
And could you talk about like how it sounds like you've been making art for a very long time. You've been painting since you were a child. You had early art training. Can you kind of discuss how that has helped as after leaving religion? Has art helped you in some way?
Art is a place where you can just go within and focus and bring your imagination to life. It's a private time where you can just play. And if inspiration comes to you during those sessions, you can get it out and put it on the canvas.
And something I've noticed, like from music, I've spent a lot of time with musicians, and I played music when I was younger, especially. There's something about the act of the presence of it. Like I'm doing it now. I'm not just thinking about it. I'm not talking to people about doing it. I'm actually like in the present moment, putting paint to canvas.
Yeah. And
How is that for you? Is that an important part of your life, or
yeah,
how does that work for you?
because you see the results immediately as you go day by day when you're working on a painting. Like right now I'm working on she's in my head, she's my main character in my book, and I'm painting her right now, what I think what she looks like. So I'll write about her and then I'm painting her at the same time. So they kind of like are going hand in hand. But with the painting, it's immediate. With writing, it's immediate for me, but I can't share it yet. So my
Right,
artwork
right.
is kind of like, okay, here, you guys can see this first, because this is like, look what I could do. Look, you can
Yeah,
get inside my head for a minute through a painting.
yeah. That's a really interesting point you make. That like I experienced that by making the Witness Underground documentary. That for
Yeah.
me, I was processing my trauma. I was like seeing myself in these people's stories and like, how am I gonna show this concept? And like I'm editing and we're going back and forth, and over the course of weeks and months, I'm processing my own personal stuff in reaction to the story. And I've seen the film, I've seen all 15 hours of the footage, and I've put the pieces together in 100 different ways, but no one's seen it yet. And it's been 6 years, and I just want to share the movie. Now it's available to watch. But it's that funny thing where like, yeah, that for me, that was the thing I processed. I went through 6 years ago. And over the first few years while I was editing, it was like really, really important and profound for me, but no one got to experience any of that. And it sounds interesting to you. Like you can put your painting out in little pieces, and it's a part of your story, and it's a part of your process on canvas.
Yeah. And now
But the book is bigger.
when I was editing for the dance, it was so wonderful when I could actually edit something that could be like a trailer that people could watch, because we couldn't share
Oh yeah.
we couldn't really share the actual whole 2 hour dance. And I did this I did the filming for that for several years and editing it. And it was wonderful to be able to take it and move it all around and do this wonderful thing for people to watch. But because it was actual music, you couldn't put it online because it would just, YouTube wouldn't have it. So,
Right.
so
With
to actually
copyright.
finally be able to share something, painting is that way because you could take a picture of it and share the process right away. So I do a lot of the process on my Instagram. Um,
Yeah,
oh,
and I also saw on your Instagram, but also on you have a YouTube channel too, don't you?
yeah,
Yeah, so you
yeah,
have like you can watch you painting, kind of like what's the guy with
yeah.
the big hair from the 80s who's so famous?
Oh, Bob
The
Ross,
the original
Happy
Bob
Trees.
Ross, Happy
Yes,
Trees,
Bob Ross.
with his soothing
Yeah,
voice.
yeah,
So you have a Happy Trees channel, a Bob Ross style
yeah,
channel. So the best way to follow you is on your Instagram. Is that what you're saying? It's for your artwork?
yeah. Instagram.
Okay.
Instagram is the place where I will post first.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then
and
anywhere else you'd like
I'm
to
on
share with people?
Facebook. Yeah, I'm on pardon?
Yeah, anywhere else? Go ahead and describe
Face
where to
I'm
follow
on
you.
Facebook, I'm on Instagram, there's my website, and then I just kind of like started playing around with my TikTok. So, um, I'm like, "Oh, maybe I'll start posting a little bit more there." There's a whole different audience there is what I've noticed. So, I do have a TikTok, and I always use my Kerry_K, so I'm easy to find. So,
Okay. Yeah, we'll put the links in the description. Right now, there's just the website and the store that we're looking at now on the screen,
yeah, and I think
which is,
at the bottom of the website, I think I have I think I have the Instagram link at
yeah,
the
you have
bottom.
Instagram and Facebook there. So if you go to the link in the description for kerrykay.com, there is a Facebook and Instagram link there now. But I will, if you're listening to this in the future, I will add those links into the description so you can go follow Kerry. So everyone go follow Kerry, sub her YouTube channel, check out her Instagram, follow her there. You're going to see her latest work. And thanks for everybody in the chat for commenting today. It's been really interesting. Fixing My Faith is another show that they just were saying goodbye. They were hanging out with us today. They have a great shot of Canada. They're just shouting out, "Your art is amazing." Wish I could express myself like that. This is there's Vern and Vern's wife. His wife has a name too, but she likes to call herself the Good Wife.
Oh,
um,
well, this
it's
was a
funny.
lot of fun. I
Yeah.
enjoyed it.
So yeah, follow Kerry and check out her Instagram. Thank you so much, Kerry, for sharing all the interesting information about the mystics and your near-death experience and all the interesting connections of your journey. Do you have any final things you wanted to share with anybody?
I just want people just go out and live life and have fun and do what is enjoyable to yourself and not to worry about others. You know, don't let other people take your joy. That's something my mom would always say.
That's beautiful. Thank you again, and I
Thank
think
you,
we'll wrap
Scott.
it up there. Yeah, we'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay, hang out.